In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a satin line bucket hat. This is my first time making a long form video, so let me know if you guys like it. We're going to be using this pattern here. I got it on Etsy for 80 cents. For materials, you're going to need satin, you're going to need your fabric, I used the cotton here, you're going to need pins, interfacing, your pattern, and you're also going to need scissors. Follow the instructions for cutting it out, but instead of cutting the lining in the same fabric you used before, you're going to cut that lining out in satin instead. I went ahead and ironed the interfacing onto the fabric pieces. Now I just went ahead and grouped everything together. We're going to take it over to our sewing machine and sew up the sides. The first thing I'm doing with my sewing machine is replacing the foot that comes with the machine and changing it over to a foot that's going to help me with the seam allowance. This step isn't 100% necessary, but it helps me keep my seam allowances straight. Make sure to put your fabric pieces right sides together and make sure that they're even. Make sure they're as even as possible, because if not, then your hat's not going to fit like it's supposed to. Here I'm just putting a few pins in. If you're using that foot, don't be like me. Put the pins the other way, because those pins are going to get stuck in that foot. When you're sewing, don't forget to backstitch the ends. If you don't backstitch the ends, your seam won't stay. And this is what it should look like when you're done. Right here, I'm just sewing together all the remaining pieces. And whenever you're done sewing everything together, make sure to take it over to your iron and iron those seams down. When you iron the seams flat, it's going to help you keep everything aligned. Also, make sure to snip any remaining thread. If not, when you sew everything together, your fabric is going to be really bulky. Next, I'm taking the two pieces for the brim and I'm putting them right sides together. And then we're going to pin it across the top. Make sure the seams are aligned. If they're not aligned, it's going to throw off the look of your hat. As you can see, I forgot to put the pins the other way again. So when I sew it, I'm going to have to take all the pins out. Don't be like me, guys. This is what it looks like when it's all pinned together. Make sure to take your time when you're sewing. Sewing a round seam is harder than sewing a straight seam, so you want to make sure you take your time so you can keep that seam straight. Once you're done, you want to make sure you trim off all that excess fabric. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn it inside out and we're going to iron it flat. This step is really important because if you don't, your hat may be bulky and it's not going to line up evenly. And this is what it looks like after it's ironed. Right now we're going to put this to the side and we're going to work on the body of the hat. These are the side pieces of the hat already sewn together. We're going to turn it inside out, take that top, and we're going to pin it around the top. The pattern has markings on it, so make sure to transfer that over to your fabric. This makes pinning it a lot easier. When you're pinning it, you want to take your time again because pinning around the curves is not easy as well. Once you're done pinning, this is what it should look like. You can use as many or as little pins as you want. I like to use a lot of pins because, like I said, pinning around the curves is not easy. When I'm sewing the hat, I like to sew flat parts down. This allows for you to maneuver that bottom part just in case it bunches up a little bit. And this is what it should look like when you're done. Next, we're going to do the exact same thing to that lining fabric. As you can see, I'm taking my time. It is sped up, but I'm taking my time on here. And as I'm moving, I'm making sure to move that fabric out of the way if it starts to bunch up a little bit. Alright, so we put that to the side, and now we're going to work on finishing off that brim. So now we're going to top stitch around the brim to make it sturdy and also to add a decorative look to it. I'm using that seam allowance foot to help me with the first row of lines. After I've sewn that first row, I'm going to line up that stitch to the edge of my presser foot, and I'm just going to sew along that line. After we finish the second line, we're going to follow the same step for the remaining stitches. I make sure I stitch all the way up to the edge of the brim. After you're done, this is what the brim should look like. As you can see, the lines are nice and straight, how we want it to be. I use the same colored thread, but you can use a contrast thread if you want. It's up to you. Now we're going to sew the hat together. You want to make sure you line up those seams so that way when you sew your hat together, everything's nice and even. When you're pinning here, take your time, of course, because you want to make sure everything's nice and even. Here I'm changing my presser foot back to that seam allowance presser foot. And now we're going to sew that brim onto the top of the hat. I like to sew brim side up because as you're sewing, you can make sure the fabric doesn't get bunched up underneath the needle. Alright, and when you're done, this is what it should look like. Technically, you can wear the hat just like this if you want to, but we're not doing that. We're making a satin line one. So now we're going to add the satin lining. To add the lining to the hat, you're pretty much going to stuff the body of the hat into the lining. And then you're going to take your time pinning everything together. When you're pinning, make sure the two pieces are right sides together. If they're not right sides together, then one of your sides will be backwards and you will not be happy. Believe me, I have done it before. And now we're going to take it to our sewing machine and sew it. Take your time sewing this because this time we're sewing through 3 layers and you can easily get one of the layers caught up and it's not going to be a good look when you're done with it. At this step, you want to leave a hole that's about 1.5 inches long. This is going to allow for you to turn that hat inside out. If you don't leave a hole, you will not be able to turn your hat inside out. Slowly turn the hat inside out. This takes a little bit of time to do, but you don't want to rip all that hard work we just did. And this is almost the final step. Once you're done, this is what the inside is going to look like. Now we're going to take it over to our sewing machine and finish off that hole. I'm placing a couple of pins on the hole, and then we're going to take it to our sewing machine and sew. Make sure to change that foot back to the regular foot. If not, your hat will definitely bunch up. You want to start the stitch a little bit before the hole. This way you're making sure you're enclosing the entire hole. And then once we're done sewing, it should look like this. Everything's fully enclosed. This hat is technically reversible, so if you want to wear it like the other way, you definitely can. This last step is optional, but I'm doing a top stitch above the brim. And then once we do that, we're done. Let me know if you guys like these long form videos. TikTok is letting us do videos for up to like 10 minutes. I think I'm here for it. It's kind of like YouTube. Anyways, let me know. Bye.